My name is Sandy Damon, and I am the event coordinator here at the library. And tonight we have the privilege of having Alex Prizgintas.
Pretty close, I like it, thank you.
And after screwing that name up, I'm going to sit down now. Thank you all for coming, and I can't wait to hear this presentation.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Where's yours?
I think we still have 7 minutes, so.
Oh, okay.
Want me to just start?
Sure.
Okay.
No.
Okay, what's hers?
Is your mic on?
She's giving it up for you.
My mic is now on. So, it's wonderful to see actually some old faces in the audience along with many, many new ones. I want to welcome you to my newest program, From City to Country, the Erie's Pine Bush branch, then and now. Some new territory for me, but some interesting history in delving to one of Orange County's backwoods branch line railroads. We begin our program today with the Erie Railroad. Now in total, the Erie was quite a massive operation expanding from New York City to Chicago. In its originality, it extended mostly from Dunkirk to Piermont on the Hudson River. Today we're going to focus on the railroad's easternmost portion, that being the New York Division, which is a collection of both its main line and various branch lines throughout the states of New York and New Jersey, one of those, of course, being the Crawford branch, known popularly as the Pine Bush branch. Looking closer in Orange County, we come to see the Erie, which in this map is indicated as all the lines in green. This analyzes all of the beautiful rail lines that once extended through Orange County, along with 6 particular branch lines. The first of these are the Erie's 2 Newburgh branches, those being the Newburgh branch itself and the Newburgh shortcut. We also have the Pine Island branch, the Montgomery branch, and of course the Pine Bush branch. And for some better legibility, here are the branch lines in order of operation. The Newburgh branch being among the Erie's earliest in Orange County, opening in January of 1850. The Pine Island branch then in 1867. The Newburgh shortcut 2 years later in 1869. The Pine Bush branch first operating in 1872, and the Montgomery branch with rails first being laid in 1879. Though the Pine Bush branch is most synonymously correlated with the Erie, it actually started more or less as its own company with close relations to the New York and Oswego Midland Railroad. Here are some of the incorporation details from an annual report of state engineer and surveyors in the state of New York. To the left, we can see clearly the incorporation for the railroad filed on August 3rd of 1868. And an interesting detail that I like to point out in this particular image is that it had connections with the New York and Oswego Midland Railroad in this particular area, stating that it would either use the same line to connect to Middletown or perhaps use a parallel line to get there. And this will be an important detail to remember for later. On the right, we have a various list of directors and officers of the railroad, and something I enjoyed emphasizing here is the fact that the line's first president was Daniel Thompson of the Thompson family, named for Thompson Ridge. Now, though incorporated in August of 1868, it took the line approximately 4 years to officially have its first train running. And here's a wonderful newspaper article from the Newburgh Telegraph on February 28th, 1872, that details this first operation. We'll first look at the portion to the left, which I have recorded for your enjoyment.
Although the Middletown and Crawford branch was completed several months ago and has been in operation for nearly 3 months now, there has been no formal opening of the road until Friday, February 23rd, 1872. The completion of this important enterprise was on a day duly celebrated by an excursion and dinner, participated by the officers, stockholders, and a few invited guests. Among the latter were the presidents of several of our local roads, members of the press, Mayor Eastman of Poughkeepsie, who was also a member of the present legislature, and a go-ahead man, and many others, numbering in all about 200. The day was bright and pleasant for an excursion. The special train left at 10 a.m. under charge of Mr. A.H. Corwin, conductor. The run was cautiously made, as the road is not in first-rate condition, requiring some ballasting. 3 cheers were given for Dan Thompson, president of the road, as the train halted at Thompson's station for water, a few rods from his dwelling.
Upon the first trip of that line, here are some further details on the right as to when that very first, not exactly the first, but the first recorded train, as noted in this article, arrived at Pine Bush.
Arriving at Pine Bush, Mr. William H. Cowley, a resident and one of the directors of the road, welcomed the party to the hospitalities of the place in a few supportive words. All then marched across the fields to Decker's halfway house, where a bountiful lunch was spread. After the refreshments were partaken of, the party strolled about for a view of the village.
So in this period of the early 1870s, this new line, known as the Middletown and Crawford Road, was very beneficial to the residents between the Fair Oaks, Circleville area and Pine Bush, primarily the dairy farming industry in the sector, which was rapidly developing during this period of the late 19th century. Though by the mid-1870s, a problem began to arise. As noted earlier, the railroad had a close connection with the New York and Oswego Midland Railway, which by this period in the mid-1870s was falling onto some unstable financial situations. And between 1874 and 1875, a decision was made essentially for the Middletown and Crawford Road to become rather independent. Previously, they had contracted with the NY and OM to use shared locomotives and passenger equipment. And during this point, the road actually purchased a locomotive directly from the New York and Oswego Midland. You can see that here, engine number 72, at the Pine Bush station. This independent, more or less, operation would continue until 1882, when the Middletown and Crawford entered a lease for a term of 99 years with the, at that time, the New York, Lake Erie, and Western Railway. And this would continue effectively until one of my evaluation maps notes that in 1930, a merger occurred formally between the Erie and the Middletown and Crawford. Detailing our route today, we will begin first by traveling along the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway main line, heading northbound, though railway technically westbound from Middletown, to Fair Oaks. Take a small trip to Fair Oaks since after 1957, which is when the O&W closed, the Erie and later the Erie-Lackawanna actually serviced some industries in Fair Oaks. And then from there at Crawford Junction, we will journey northeasternly to Pine Bush. Our various stops today will include Middletown, Crawford Junction, Fair Oaks, Circleville, Bullville, Thompson Ridge, and Pine Bush. Beginning in Middletown, I like to start at East Main Street, which was a rather important junction for what we'll see are 4 railroads in the city. In this rather technical evaluation map, seen here by this red line is East Main Street. In this corridor seen here, just barely to the left-hand side, this is the Erie Railroad's main line, charting its rather windy way through the city. Over here, these other lines are the Ontario and Western Railway main line, as well as parts of the Middletown and Unionville, later the Middletown and New Jersey Railway. And then right here, there's a track that's rather important. This is a crossover segment that allows trains from the Erie, especially at their yard at Signal DW in Middletown off James Street, to connect with the New York, Ontario, and Western tracks to head north or west towards Pine Bush. For better geographical location, I have a segment here from Mulder's 1903 Orange County Atlas. You can see again here, East Main Street indicated by this red line. To the left, we have all the Erie Railroad's tracks on their main line. Towards the top of the screen, the train will be heading further into Middletown and then out towards Howells, Otisville, and Port Jervis. Over here, we have the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway main line. Those are the 2 tracks furthest to the right. They're heading northernly towards Middletown. Their Middletown station, Wickham Avenue, I should note. And of course, here again in orange, we can see that important crossover track where Erie trains could connect to the O&W and furthermore the Pine Bush Bridge. And comparatively, we have this overlaid with a satellite view in the present day, again with East Main Street. For comparison, this star is where a former Tony Bappa's restaurant was once located. Here in blue, we have what was once the Erie main line taken out of service in 1983. The part below the red line is today's northern trailhead for Orange County's Heritage Trail. In orange is approximately where the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway once operated, again abandoned on March 29, 1957. And right here is where that crucial crossover track would have overlaid. The one track that still remains today, used by the Middletown, New Jersey Railway, runs approximately in some areas where that track would have once stood. Now, looking from more of a 3D vantage point, here's one of my favorite images from the Ontario and Western Railway Historical Society, where you can see all 4 railways I had mentioned previously in this one image. We first have here East Main Street, emphasized by that red line. We then have the Erie Railroad's tracks, those two furthest to the left. You can see the Main Street station also, which we'll see again very shortly. We have the O&W's tracks as well as the M&N-J. And can anyone in the audience identify the fourth railroad in this picture?
Trolley line on Sprague.
Oh, you got it, Doug. There you go. There is the, well actually there is the crossover track, but yes. There is the trolley line. That's the Middletown Goshen trolley, which passed right through this area, which emphasizes at this point is really an important juncture between all of Middletown's 4 railroads and an important Union Station site. So it's not a surprise that the Erie, right above that blue arrow, had their own station. I should also note, right above there, you can see the Middletown and Unionville's East Main Street station, previously built by the New York and Oswego Midland. Up until recently, it was claimed by legend to be the longest continually used station in America.
Alex, can you put the mic a little closer to your mouth?
Yes, I can try. So,
There you go.
continuing on, we have right over here the East Main Street station, which was built by the Erie and acted more as a point by which all the 4 railroads could interchange with the Erie itself. Rather unusual station construction, which just a generally long platform and a small enclosed portion at its northern or western end for ticket service. In the photograph to the right, you can see today's Switch Inn in the background with the wonderful sign for Orange County Brewery on the rooftop. And today you can see a then and now comparison of that view taken off East Main Street, Middletown. Switch Inn, of course, still standing. The Main Street station was taken out of service approximately in 1920. Comparatively, by 1954, this is the scene at East Main Street. You'll notice that the station by this point, which is right off to the left of the picture, is long gone. Though in 1954, the Erie's still heavily operating to an extent. The O&W still has 3 years of life left in its company. Still a rather busy area in the center of Middletown. You can see, of course, the Erie's rather, in my opinion, well-maintained tracks to the left in this image, and the more disused and out-of-service tracks of the Middletown, New Jersey in the center of this image. We take a trip 20 years later to, there's again both the Erie's tracks in blue and the M&N-J in orange for a better comparison. 20 years later, in 1974, from approximately the same vantage point, you can see again barely the Erie's tracks off to the left-hand side, and of course David T. Maney is standing on the tracks of the Middletown in New Jersey. Maney in 1974 photographed the entire Pine Bush branch, starting at Middletown and heading all the way to Pine Bush, and we will be dwelling upon his pictures throughout this program. Here's another image of Maney's taken a little bit north of that shot. You can see there East Main Street in the middle of the picture, as well as the later Clemson Brothers factory in the background. And superimposing an image, one of Ray Brown's wonderful color images, you can see approximately there with that overlay of the Clemson Saw Brothers building in the background, an Erie-Lackawanna train heading on the O&W, former O&W main line north towards Pine Bush. Heading today at East Main Street, you can see a great deal has changed. Only one track remains, part of that crossover between the Erie and the O&W. Where the Erie once stood, now a doctor's and medical building, stands directly on the right-of-way. And the O&W would have been generally in this location, now covered by pavement, as we head north towards the Wickham Avenue station. Now we come to a scene of Middletown's industrial heart in 1947. This is just north of East Main Street, and you can see here on the bottom we have the Erie's main line heading towards their station at James Street in Middletown. And up above we have the O&W main line, which is what the Pine Bush branch trains would have used as well to access their line at Crawford Junction. Now, heading away from East Main Street, I like to use this picture from James E. Bailey. A little history. Bailey was an Erie Road employee stationed out of Meadville, Pennsylvania, and between 1909 and 1911, he photographed nearly every station on the Erie Railroad system. Wonderful glass plate negatives with tons of detail that aid historians of the Erie Railway. In the background of this Bailey image, you will note a switch tower here, which is the Railroad Avenue Tower. It was a O&W service tower, though trains on the Pine Bush branch would have passed it. An interesting detail about this particular image of the Railroad Avenue Tower, you might notice a sign on the side, which is actually right here at the table today. Amazingly, at some point during the tower's disuse or afterwards, former Middletown Road historian Marv Cohen was able to acquire the piece and remains in the hands of a collector today. A wonderful piece of history preserved. We will also talk about Circleville later in time as well. One of the major railroad crossings heading after East Main Street comes Wickham Avenue. This was the site of the O&W's station in Middletown and headquarters as well, which we'll see very shortly. In this scene taken at Wickham Avenue, looking back towards East Main Street, you can see the Clemson Brothers factory in the background for a comparison. And comparatively today, compared to that picture, 5 tracks in that probably 1950s era image, only 1 track remains today, though that one storefront to the left remains standing in both images. Now, directly on the opposite side of this image was the O&W's Wickham Avenue station. This is the original structure that serviced trains, a modest 2-story building. In 1892, it was replaced with the grandeur of this structure by Bradford Lee Gilbert. This is the original configuration for the O&W's Wickham Avenue station. Notice it has only 1 tower standing, the South Tower, with a rather large platform in the background. In 1904, this was expanded to both the South and the North Towers. You can see here the North Tower added. And it was also during this time that one of the station's large businesses began to succeed, and this was Seaholzer's Restaurant. It's important to note that the New York, Ontario and Western Railway, running from Weehawken to Oswego on Lake Ontario, had no dining cars. In its place, the railroad operated several restaurants in many of their larger stations, with Middletown certainly being no exception with Seaholzer's Restaurant. The restaurant suffered a massive fire in 1919, but was rebuilt and continued operating until the railroad closed in until passenger service, I should say, ended in 1953. Now, the Seaholzer's Restaurant has an interesting detail among O&W restaurants in general, and that is the use of these glass bottles, indicated depot restaurants. In railroad culture, you might say these are often posed as milk bottles, though, quite frankly, there is no evidence to fully confirm that they were used for milk. The 2 postcard images known of milk boys selling milk unknown to be trains are actually using paper cups. The bottles themselves are more than certainly genuine. In fact, I can attest to personal experience having walked upon the former O&W right-of-way Middletown and actually finding a shard of one of these glass milk bottles. Though their contents are up for debate. Grape juice has been highly debated, and in this postcard it actually advertises some different chocolate condiments and drinks, that also being a possible alternative for this bottle. Regardless of what it originally carried, it certainly remains an interesting piece of O&W history and Middletown history likewise. In 1920, the O&W station received its last major architectural difference, that being the bridging of the South and North Towers, with now 3 stories, making it a rather massive and imposing 3-story structure, also serving as now the headquarters for the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway. The station remained largely as such until its closing on March 29, 1957. This is taken from a neat article from the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin towards the ends of operation. Now, of course, this was a rather important point, as the Pine Bush branch trains would not have stopped here, but both passenger at that point, which ended in the 1930s, and later freight trains would have passed this station. And here seen as such through the images of Ray Brown passing Pine Bush, this still being during the Erie times, and also during when the O&W was still in operation, so before 1957. Unfortunately, after the O&W closed, the station later transformed into more so of a business complex, relatively well maintained until 2004, when the structure suffered a massive fire. This is the state of the O&W station in Middletown today, quite unfortunately. On and off, there are always talks of restoration, and of the latest discussions, I can only hope that this very important and integral part of Middletown history can be saved for future generations to appreciate and enjoy. Now, heading north of Middletown, we look north from Wickham Avenue. This is taken probably from the North Tower of the O&W station. A neat image of what is likely a Y1 light class light mountain O&W locomotive heading eastbound with a load of anthracite coal trains. And we're looking north towards the Wisner Avenue crossing. As seen here, here is ONW number 405, the Mountaineer, crossing Wisner Avenue, heading west. You'll notice a few things here. First, in the background, what is barely made out is the Wickham Avenue station. Again, I always like to connect photos from one point to another to show you how we progressed along our travels. But you'll also, of course, note the Mountaineer here. This was the ONW's main steam-lined locomotive, streamlined, I should say, put into place in around 1938 and designed by the noted railroad artist and designer Otto Kuhler. Working on a very low budget, he still managed to create a rather attractive method of transportation for summer goers on the New York Ontario Western Railway traveling to the Sullivan County Borscht Belt resort destinations. This scheme lasted until the 1940s, when the 405 was actually returned to its original appearance without its streamlining. Comparatively today, here is the Wisner Avenue crossing. You can see only 2 tracks remaining today, the first of those in the center, and off to the left is a siding for the Raleigh Lumber Plant in Middletown. This originally would have been one of the leads to the O&W's Middletown yard and engine facilities. You can see those here, by far the largest yard in Middletown, not only serving as a coal storage, I should note, and classification district for Middletown, but also the main servicing point for all of the O&W's locomotives and cars. Taken here in the 1903 atlas, you can see the extent of the O&W's Middletown yard, of course. We have Wisner Avenue right here at the yard's eastern or southern end. Over here are all of the engine servicing facilities, as well as the massive roundhouse, which lasted to the early 1960s. And I do not have an arrow, but I'll also point out, up to the top you will see 4 circular structures, and I'll actually go back here. You can see those up at top as well. Those are the Dodge coal storage units. The O&W's major commodity was anthracite coal, so it would have been important to store and then later transport this valuable commodity to other destinations. You can see the Middletown yard in 1957. By this point, a ghost of its former self, but still a rather formidable presence in Middletown. You'll notice those Dodge coal storage units, which in the picture to the left, they would have been off to the left or no longer there anymore, though much of the yard's engine facilities are still largely intact, including its roundhouse. Of note, this image taken to the right was done in 1957, possibly in March or even on March 29, 1957 itself, from the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin, showing the O&W's yard in its final days of service. Here's the scene in 1974. You'll notice very few tracks remaining by this point, but much of the O&W's engine facilities still intact, and this remained much of the case until 2020, when the erecting shops were gutted by a massive fire, again destroying a very large part of Middletown's industrial history. Today, this is the Middletown yard as such today. Again, I should note an outdated satellite image, since it doesn't record that fire. But down here, you will note many of the O&W's engine servicing facilities, by this point used by various businesses, and the Teflon scrap yard in this area is the former site of those Dodge coal storage units, as well as part of the railroad yard. And seen here is a comparison of the Wisner Avenue crossing between 1974 and today. Heading to the northern end of this yard, we come to Mud Mills Road. I'm just pointing out there one of the O&W buildings in the background. I believe that was one of their supply storage facilities. We come to Mud Mills Road. This was originally an overpass over the northern portion of the O&W's Middletown yard and its main line, heading towards 4-Story Junction. Later, this bridge was eliminated and now serves as a railroad crossing. I should note, in the modern day, this is important. This is the final place in our program where we will still have tracks present. Everything northbound of here, the tracks are no longer remaining, and we will be tracking then and now without rails anymore in the ground. Just north of Mud Mills Road is 4-Story Junction, which I always found to be a rather interesting term, as when there were 2 railroads operating here, there was actually not a junction. There was no connection between the 2 lines. Here, this line indicates where the Middletown, I should say the New York, Ontario Western Railway crosses over the Erie's Graham Line. Comparatively, Well, today, and you'll see there actually is a junction, but the O&W no longer crosses over the Erie. You can see it right there where it once would have operated. I will get into in a little bit why this was the case, why this has changed. Rather interesting part of Middletown's history, Middletown's roading history, I should say. Up into the 1980s, by this point the Pine Bush branch tracks to Pine Bush had already been removed, but there was still rail service to Fair Oaks. And when railroads were being reevaluated in this area, a crucial point was this bridge over the Graham Line. And I'm going to use actually this 1992 Conrail map. And you'll notice in this map, right towards left of the center, we have in Middletown that little purple line. That's the track still going to Fair Oaks. It went as far as Fair Oaks Road to service the Weld and Cox lumber and fee business. And over here, that little bit of blue, that's actually the former Erie Main Line, which was still intact from Howells down to East Main Street, Middletown. And that's how trains would have accessed the Middletown, New Jersey. Well, what occurred is during the 1980s, an inspection was done of the bridge at Four-Story Junction, which was found to have major structural issues, major structural faults. And during that inspection, that land where that junction is now was found to be for sale. So an easy solution was made. That junction was put in place. That bridge was eliminated, also limiting the line of Fair Oaks. And as such, the old Erie in blue heading through Middletown, which includes several grade crossing, was also removed as well. So an efficient solution for the railroad, but unfortunately a major loss for local railroading history. Here's a look at that bridge at Four-Story Junction. Again, that passed over the Erie's Graham Line. A little bit of history. The Erie's main line between Harriman and approximately Guymard, which is in the Graham area between Otisville and Port Jervis, that part of the main line was riddled with steep grades, tight curves, and most importantly, several grade crossings through densely populated areas like Monroe, Goshen, and Middletown. As a result, this caused freight train speeds to highly decline. So between 1906 and 1909, the Graham Line was built. This is a freight bypass that extended from Harriman at Newburgh Junction to Guymard Graham between Otisville and Port Jervis, and it featured steady grades, very few tight curves, and most importantly, no grade crossings as well. Around Middletown, the Graham Line bypassed the city, and at this point, under the O&W, it chose to pass underneath the New York, Ontario and Western Railway main line, and the O&W passed over the Graham Line with this bridge. Here you can see the Graham Line in some later images, as well as Four-Story Junction with O&W diesel units heading, in both of these cases, south or east back towards Middletown. And here with Rich Taylor, you can see the Four-Story Junction Bridge in 1985, and you'll notice just barely that there are actually still rails on top of this bridge during this Ontario and Western Railway Historical Society fan trip. I'm going to take a look back to one of those 1950s images at Four-Story Junction. You'll notice the bridge in the foreground, but in the distance you may also notice another bridge barely peeking through. That there is Route 302, which originally used to be a grade crossing and was later turned into a bridge. Here you can see a look at the grade crossing removal at Route 302, and later seen here with its bridge complete, this O&W NW2 unit heading towards Crawford Junction. Comparatively today, here is the site approximately of the 302 crossing. You can very clearly in this area, if you drive by on 302 between Route 17 and its junction with 17M, actually see where the right-of-way was, and there is a line indicating where it approximately operated during that period. We then come to Crawford Junction, a very important point in our program, as this is where the Erie's Crawford branch to Pine Bush separated with the O&W's main line. You can see the point of that junction right here. And comparatively today, here's again taken from satellite image. You can see the junction point right there, still very well visible, especially after, at this point, the O&W being abandoned for 50 years, and the Crawford branch a little bit less, but still a considerable amount of time. And even being in swampland, it still remains very visible to satellite images. And here, of course, you can see the Pine Bush branch heading at this point more northeasternly towards Pine Bush. Here's a look at Crawford Junction with the switch tower still intact. This is heading westerly, northwestern, towards Bloomingburg on the O&W, but right in this area you can barely see the Crawford branch jutting off and heading northeast towards Pine Bush. Likewise, here are some scenes of Crawford Junction, both in steam and diesel eras along the New York, Ontario and Western Railway's main line. These are both taken from Route 302. You'll notice by this point the tower is also no longer standing, so it didn't have a great deal of a lifespan. You'll in the background also notice the rather massive bridge which Route 17M used to cross the O&W's main line. At that point it was still most likely Route 17. We will touch on that rather shortly. Over here we have Crawford Junction in 1961. By this point the O&W has been abandoned for only a few years. Its tracks here of course still in place, being used by the Erie both to access the Pine Bush branch and also to service a few industries in Fair Oaks. We touched upon earlier the Route 17M bridge. Here it is seen here with O&W Camelback number 246 heading east or southbound towards Middletown. This bridge remained until the 1970s, when even still though the tracks are being used, it was removed. The bridge was likely built in its time to ease traffic considerations with summer goers traveling towards the Borscht Belt region. At this point it was transferred to a grade crossing. And you can see here comparatively today where the grade crossing approximately once stood. Again, a little hard to point out in this Google Street Map image, but you can see there in the shade where the tracks had once been. When you're driving along this area in Fair Oaks, you can very clearly see where the O&W main line once traversed the landscape. Along the O&W, we come to our northernmost point, which is here at Fair Oaks. Here's an overview of the rather small village of Fair Oaks. A lot of our action will be taking place on Fair Oaks Road. You'll notice here this small white structure, that was the O&W's flag stop style station at Fair Oaks. But I'm taking more of an interest in this railroad cut back here off Fair Oaks Road. Here's an image right here of the Fair Oaks cut, and in particular, I would like to take note of this retaining wall, as seen right here, which remained well through the Erie's, after the O&W's abandonment and through the Erie's service of the line, and later Conrail after 1976. If you happen to be venturing through this area of Fair Oaks Road, take a look out, especially if you're driving from Fair Oaks Road towards that way Van Burenville Road, and you take a look to your left, and you will still notice that cut intact today, along with that retaining wall off Fair Oaks Road. We're going to take a trip now from the O&W now along the Crawford branch towards Pine Bush. First important area is the Route 17 crossing, which the Pine Bush branch was notorious for. In fact, so notorious that in 1959 it was installed with traffic lights actually at this traffic stop, a controlled signal at Route 17. It must have been certainly a very interesting sight traveling along the Quickway and finding a railroad crossing at this point. In fact, in the 1960s, Congressman Benjamin A. Gilman had petitioned for a bridge to be built at this site. Clearly, by that point, the likely light traffic, approximately 3 trains a week on the Pine Bush branch, did not warrant a bridge to be constructed. Comparatively today, here is the site of that crossing. Again, a little bit hard to see. Route 17 has developed considerably the Quickway, but that's where the Pine Bush branch would have relatively crossed. And if you look with a keen eye on this portion of the Quickway, you can still make out the right-of-way for the old Crawford branch. We now come into Circleville, our first stop along the Pine Bush branch rightfully. Here's from the bow map. You'll see right here, interestingly, the Beeks Dairy. The Pine Bush branch serviced several dairy farms and creameries along its line. The Beeks family is a well-known family in Orange County. Their first creamery was founded in 1878 in Salisbury Mills, and eventually grew to probably occupy between 10 to 15 similar creameries across Orange County before being acquired by Borden's in the 1920s. You also notice here, rather importantly, at this point, the steel viaduct which Goshen Turnpike used to cross over the Pine Bush branch. We'll be getting back to that very shortly. Here is Circleville, taken from the 1903 Orange County Atlas. Right here you can of course see back to Fair Oaks with its station. Over here is Crawford Junction below, and then here we have Circleville, and you notice that this map very clearly indicates the station site off today's Creamery Road, between Creamery Road and Goshen Turnpike in Circleville. And then comparatively today we have a scene from satellite view, with the orange line of course being the former site of the Crawford branch, and right about where this arrow is being where the Circleville station once stood. Now, I noted before, the Goshen Turnpike in Circleville crossed over later on a metal viaduct, originally a wooden bridge over the Crawford branch. Comparatively, today, that bridge was later removed, and you can see it then in now comparison with this home off Goshen Turnpike in Circleville. I believe there was some newspaper evidence to report that this might have actually been removed while the road was still running. But in this general area, you can make out where the railroad once operated, the right-of-way, just on the other side of this home through Circleville. Another neat facet that James E. Bailey did when photographing his stations on the Erie Marine Line is he made these wonderful diagrams of each depot site. And here are the Circleville station grounds. You can see the station itself sitting directly adjacent to the highway, that being Creamery Road, and the freight house directly next to that. Here is the Circleville passenger station in 1909, taken alongside Creamery Road. You'll notice comparatively the station sign in front from the Circleville. Likely, in comparing the fonts, it may very well be the same sign or just a bit later in time. Here is the freight station. I always found it interesting how they directly attached the station sign to the structure in that manner, likely convenient as the structure sat so closely to the passenger station. And then today, approximately showing the location of the Circleville station comparatively today to Creamery Road. A great deal has changed in Circleville today. A part of that has actually become a rail trail, I've heard. But this is generally where the station grounds would have been in this portion of the Pine Bush branch. We've come heading further northeast to the Cooten Road crossing at Circleville. Again, an area that has rather largely developed when you compare to today's view. You can still make out just barely the Pine Bush branch heading into the weeds. That lake, though, in the shot to the left, it's still there today, that small pond. You have to look a little carefully through the weeds, but it does still remain to this day. We now come from Circleville to Bullville, which is important to emphasize. This was the point at which the railroad crossed Route 302 at a grade crossing. From this point further northeast towards Pine Bush, the line would remain on the eastern side of Route 302 until its destination. You can see there Route 302 crossing the Pine Bush branch. And today with a comparative then and now image of satellite showing where the line would have approximately operated in this area of Orange County. When comparing Route 302 today, you can see again through the weeds, a little hard to tell, but in the image to the left, this one to the left is looking towards Pine Bush, and you can still very clearly make out the former right-of-way, and the second looking back, I should say, southwest towards Circleville, again, generally where the line would have operated in that direction. We come now to Bullville, again with the evaluation map. Again, another important site with two creameries serviced here compared to the one in Circleville, which we'll see later. Seen here, you can see the Newburgh and Kentucky Turnpike, known better today as Route 17K. And right here, that structure identified is the passenger station. Unlike Circleville, the station is actually indicated on this valuation map because it was still standing, and we'll see it was standing well into the 1970s and then later moved. Here's Bullville on the 1903 Orange County Atlas, again showing the Newburgh and Kentucky Turnpike at center. And the station right here at the corner of Leibold Road and Lunny Lane. And then today we have Bullville from the satellite image with here seeing the Pine Bush branch. With the arrow heading towards Pine Bush, we have 17K running diagonally across the image. And you'll note along the Pine Bush branch at either end of the image there are two structures with red roofs. Those are the two creameries that the railroad served. To the left we have the Sheffield Farms plant. Again, Sheffield Farms formed by the merger of Sheffield Brothers Creamery and T.W. Decker and Sons, both of which were in Westchester County. But the Sheffield Farms itself operated many creameries across Orange County, including locations in Bullville, Blooming Grove, as well as in the Montgomery region. Over here on the other end, we have the Weiss Glass plant as well. They were a company based out of Long Island, which had their main Orange County creamery located here in Bullville. Here are the Bullville station grounds, again seen from James E. Bailey's sketch from December of 1909. You have Leibold Road seen to the the right-hand side of this image, and then showing the passenger and freight stations on either side of the Pine Bush branch. This is taken from Libel Road heading towards Pine Bush. You can of course see the Bullville station and freight house on either side. A wonderful facet of these Bailey photographs is when you zoom in of finding the different details, and this by far is my most favorite for two reasons. On the left you can see an advertisement for Tompkins Dry Goods Company at 35 North Main Street in Middletown, a very popular department store that lasted well into the modern age and is now an auction house in the center of Middletown. And also I found interesting this barrel, though I can't make out the name, it's to some proprietor in Bullville. Always interesting details to find in these Bailey photographs, and when I look at these images from across Orange County, I always find myself discovering a new detail. Here's taken the opposite direction of Bullville, heading back towards Circleville, Libel Road in the background, and seeing both the passenger and freight stations on either side of the Pine Bush branch. Here are some closer views showing the Bullville structure. What's rather unique about the Pine Bush branch is that each station had a unique design. Circleville was generally the most plain. Bullville had a still relatively plain but more differentiated design with some roof elements as well as that neat expanded window in the foreground. Pine Bush was again plain but had a flat roof design, and then Thompson Ridge, I should say, had the flat roof design, and Pine Bush was rather more ornate and had an addition, as we will see very soon. Here's the Bullville Freight House from two different directions. One of the larger freight houses on the line in my studies. This is likely due to possibly the two creameries in town as well as other industries that would have come to this point. Bullville was more of the midpoint along the Pine Bush branch. Heading into 1974, here's Libel Road in Bullville. You'll notice by this point the station has generally been moved, I believe, by this point. And you can see here a comparison between then and now at Libel Road. The key point here is noticing the home in the background and that small addition, which you can make out in both images. Likewise, you can see here the Bullville station still at its original location in 1972, and comparatively today, the station was later acquired by Al Schubert and moved to Circleville. And if you ever are traveling through Circleville on Goshen Turnpike heading south, you might still notice it today off the road. It is the only station along the Pine Bush branch remaining today, and a rather neat piece of architecture, still even attaining its 1970s red paint scheme. Coming now into Thompson Ridge, of course named for the family of the Middletown and Crawford's first president, Daniel Thompson. We have here County Highway 17, the major road crossing in Thompson Ridge. And the site of the station approximately at this location, heading towards the left is Pine Bush, towards the right is Bullville, Circleville, Crawford Junction, and Middletown. As seen on the 03 Atlas, you can see clearly here where both the Howell Presbyterian Church is located at the corner of County Highway 17 and Route 302, and then over towards the center where the creamery and feed store located alongside of the Pine Bush branch as well as the site of the station. And then comparatively in today's view, you can see there County Highway 17 directly in the center, and the right-of-way heading directly in this location with the arrow pointing towards Pine Bush, I should say. Seen here are the Thompson Ridge Station grounds, of course, with County Highway 17 in the center. The freight house and passenger station are located on opposing sides of the tracks. Right in this scene, you can see the Thompson Ridge Station. As noted before, it had a flat roof structure, rather unique among Erie Railroad stations. Both of these scenes are taken heading towards Pine Bush. These are both postcard images, I should note. Bailey did stop by and take his 4 images of the Thompson Ridge Station in 1909, a rather unique rural setting along the Erie main line. My favorite of these 4 is to the upper right-hand corner. If you zoom in on that image, you can see a wonderful advertisement for Erie Road terminals around New York City, as well as that neat Erie Railroad baggage cart. And comparatively today, both again taken towards Pine Bush. That one driveway in the center is approximately where the right-of-way would have been of the Pine Bush branch. As for the freight station, located as stated on the opposite side of the tracks and the opposite side of the County Highway 17 crossing, you'll notice in the background a structure, a barn I should say, for the Reed Ice Cream Company. This was a large business out of New York City which operated two major plants in Orange County, one in Monroe and the other seen here in Thompson Ridge. And comparatively today, this is approximately the site of that. Both of the old buildings no longer exist, and that garage stands more or less on the former site of the right-of-way. We come to Van Kuren's, which is a rather short flag stop on a road. What I noticed interestingly when studying this evaluation map is looking at the revision records. You'll notice it states that it was the retirement of a boxcar body used as the station on this ground. So what it appeared is that the Erie Railroad actually took an old boxcar off of its trucks and used that as the station until 1928. You can see here comparatively from the 1903 atlas of Van Kuren Station standing along Van Kuren Road between Thompson Ridge and Pine Bush. And today by satellite image, approximately this point by Van Kuren Avenue is where the right-of-way would have been with Route 302 towards the bottom of the image. Of course, again, the arrow heading towards Pine Bush. We come to our final destination, that being Pine Bush, as the railroad weaves its way to its end of the line. You notice here this crossing being Black Hawk Road, and then heading through towards the Main and Depot Avenue intersections towards the end of the line at Pine Bush. Taken again from the 1903 atlas, looking primarily at the railroad's terminus, you'll notice of importance the turntable located here, which for many years we had never seen a picture of, and about 2 years ago, a James E. Bailey image yielded the first known image of the turntable itself. Rather interesting discovery. And today, here is a scene of the line coming into Pine Bush. A little hard to tell from this image. The railroad would approximately run along this trajectory here, with the final arrow being the approximate location of where that terminal and small engine house once stood, which we will see shortly. Here we have the Pine Bush Station grounds, again seen by James E. Bailey. That highway is Depot Street off to the right. And you'll notice in particular the addition seen here, which Sir Bailey actually noted during his second photographing session of the station, added later. I was able to obtain recently this wonderful image for the program of Frank Wallace, the station agent at Pine Bush, from Frank Koblitzky, the president of the Adirondack Scenic Railroad. His family, of course, having deep ties to Pine Bush. A wonderful image here seen of the station in its original configuration before the addition was added. There's Station Agent Wallace pictured right there, sitting on a classic Erie Railroad baggage car outside the station. Here are further images of the Pine Bush Station taken by Bailey in 1909, showing again that addition being added with both increased indoor and outdoor passenger space. Seen again after the addition was completed, you'll notice that the roof here is a different color, indicating that part was added later in time. And in that image to the right, I want you to take close notice of this home in the background, which you will also see in the old image here. It's one of the few geographical landmarks you can use to tie these images then and now, since this area of Pine Bush has developed to rather a great deal. You'll notice here various scenes of locomotives at Pine Bush Station. This is one of the few points along the Pine Bush Branch that was heavily shown on postcards, and with many trains arriving at this destination, there were also a great deal of passengers. It's important to note that unlike the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway, which traveled through the heartland of many resort destinations in the Hudson Valley, this was arguably one of the Erie's closest points to destinations like New Paltz, where Mohonk House was, or the resorts of Ellenville, and other areas in the southern Sullivan and Ulster County areas, I should say, wrong side of the Hudson River. So, as a result, this would have been a heavily frequented stop for passengers looking to travel to those destinations, thus why so many passengers are seen in these postcard images. Here seen is the Pine Bush Freight Station. Again, in comparing then and now, I'm going to look at the image to the left. And you'll notice again that little portion of house on Road Avenue, which can be seen in both images, comparing then and now, the station generally sitting on the Agway property today. I mentioned before the Pine Bush turntable and engine house, which you can see here in 1909. actually a wonderful image of an Erie railroad engine sitting on top of that probably manually operated turntable with the engine house in the background and the freight station in the foreground. Here's a look at the Pine Bush Station in the late Erie and EL eras. This has been anywhere from the 1950s through probably 1972 when that color image was taken. The station did not last long much after that point. Comparatively, 2 years later in 1974, we look back to the images of David T. Maney, who traveled through Pine Bush first here at Black Hawk Road. This is looking back southwest, I should say, towards Thompson Ridge and Bullville. And comparatively today, you can see again the Pine Bush branch in both images. You'll notice a telegraph pole still staying there. That's Wolf's Head Lane, private lane. That is most likely one of the last telegraph poles still standing on this area of the Pine Bush branch. Around the area where Pine Bush has been commercially developed of Boniface Drive, the right-of-way has actually become roads in two different areas. Both of these areas in pavement are where the Pine Bush branch would have once functioned, and in particular in the image to the right. The right-of-way would have continued straight in this location while this pavement turns off towards the right-hand side of the screen. In 1974, David T. Maney photographed what remained of the Pine Bush branch in the center of Pine Bush, off Railroad Avenue between Main and Depot Streets. I look specifically at the photograph to the left for a then and now comparison of this region. You can see in some areas just barely this one commercial structure. I should say here this is where the route would have stood, but there is a commercial structure in the background of both of these images that does still stand towards the middle. But again, a great deal of development. I always found it interesting how the railroad was so closely pointed next to Railroad Avenue, almost directly on top of the pavement. Now, in terms of the later years of the Crawford branch's operations, I always find an important point to begin is in 1957 when the Erie purchased the O&W main line, finalized on November 7, 1957. This would have been from Middletown to Fair Oaks. This allowed the Erie to gain access, in addition to the industries at Fair Oaks, also to the Pine Bush branch, even after the O&W closed operations. 3 years later, in 1960, the Erie would merge with its rival, the Lackawanna Road, forming the Erie-Lackawanna Railway. And it was as early as this note here, purchasing the 5 miles of O&W right-of-way, but continuing on. As early as 1965-66, talks were being made of abandoning the Pine Bush branch. You can see first to the left is an indication of discussing the discontinuation of agents at Goshen and Pine Bush. What I found interesting in this article noted here from the Goshen Independent Republican on November 17, 1966, is that the station at Pine Bush was handling only trains 3 days a week. Now, to some people that might sound like a reasonable number of traffic, but it's important to note that at this point, the Erie-Lackawanna was a railroad operating across 5 different states of the nation. It was also not in the best financial conditions, so eliminating routes that had less economic traffic would have been important to maintain stability, financial stability. What is important to note, however, is that the Pine Bush branch did have an importance after 1957. All those railroads serviced by the O&W in towns like Bloomingburg, and especially on the Ellenville and Kingston branch, in principally Ellenville, no longer had railroad connections along the O&W, which serviced the interior of much of New York State, and thus in these areas of southern Sullivan and Dutch Ulster counties, Pine Bush became the closest point where companies like Channel Master and Ellenville could reach railroad traffic. So as seen here, you can see on September 23, 1965, there was an urge to keep the station open at Pine Bush in order for traffic to be maintained at some of these industries in southern Sullivan and Ulster counties. Now again, in 10 years, more drastic measures would be taken. By this point, the Erie-Lackawanna would be in much more dire financial straits, as well as other roads across the Northeast. Most notably, I'd like to emphasize the 1968 merger between the New York Central and Pennsylvania roads, forming Penn Central, which spelled a deal of railroad confusion and dilemmas across the nation as a whole. By this point, in 1974, this was the early planning prior to the formation of Conrail in 1976, which was the merger of several Class I railroads across the northeast and eastern portion of the United States. In this 1974 article from the Beacon Evening News, you can actually see the petition abandonment for 4 different railroad lines in this area. We begin first with the Pine Bush branch, which is seen here in blue, but also indicated for abandonment was the Montgomery branch and Wallkill Valley line, all the way from Campbell Hall to Kingston, as well as the Catskill Mountain branch of the New York Central from Kingston to Grand Hotel. That's today's High Mountain, where Bel Air Ski Mountain is. We have the Newburgh branch, petition for abandonment as early as 1974, and the Hopewell Beacon line of the former Newburgh-Dutchess and Connecticut Railway. What's interesting to note in this image is, of all these railroads, of course, the Pine Bush branch would be removed, as would the Newburgh branch. The Montgomery branch in green, the portion from Campbell Hall to Walden, is still operating and arguably thriving today, though north of that the Wallkill Valley does no longer exist. Much of it is a rail trail today. The Catskill Mountain branch was able to survive for many years and today remains in a rather fragmented fashion, a part of it recently being converted to a rail trail. And in yellow, the Hopewell Beacon line does still remain intact today, but is no longer in service and is currently being developed for rail and trail use. By this point in the final era, I like to look at this post-1976 map, which I note as abandonment by Conrail. This I find to be quite critical in identifying when the line was effectively abandoned. This is a relatively early map in Conrail's career. You will notice, however, that the Pine Bush branch is not indicated. Only that little stub to Crawford, to Fair Oaks is in place, which is rather critical, as many other lines abandoned by Conrail are still shown, like the Newburgh branch, or more interestingly, the Poughkeepsie Bridge, which burned in 1974 and was never restored. So this pretty cleanly puts the abandonment, say, during, I should say more so out of service around, I believe, June of, around the 1978 period is believed when it was read, and then after that with rails being scrapped. Well, I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight.